Imagine this: a dirt runway cut into the scrub, its edges swallowed by night. A single prop engine coughs to life. Headlamps kill. Radios go silent. In the shadow between midnight and morning, crates wrapped in canvas slide across a bed of plywood and disappear into the belly of a plane with no markings and a pilot with no name. On the ground, a truck without plates idles, its driver counting by touch. Not coins, not bills, but bars. Each one stamped somewhere far away, each one born from a hole in African soil. For decades, gold hasn't only left Africa through ports you can photograph, inspect, and tax. It has slipped out through side doors, hidden airstrips, unregistered warehouses, back roads that cut across borders like veins. Entire fortunes vanish into vaults you will never see in Dubai, into quiet accounts in Zurich, into jewelry counters in cities that will never learn the names of the miners whose hands bled for that shine. This isn't a ghost story. It is a map drawn in omission, enforced by silence. Who guards these routes? Who signs the papers that never reach a ledger? Who looks the other way when a manifest says machinery, but the box thuds like metal and dreams? And why has no one in power, no one with a microphone, a budget, or a badge, ever followed one of these shipments from pit to plane to profit? Stay with me. Tonight, we pull the thread. We'll follow the money from artisanal pits in Ghana, convoy roads in Burkina Faso, and border towns in Mali, right up the chain to the desks where silence pays a salary. What we find will not be comfortable. But once you see the roots, you cannot unsee the theft. To understand the secret gold routes, you have to rewind the clock. Long before unmarked trucks rumbled down dirt roads at midnight, long before private jets touched down on hidden strips, Africa's relationship with gold was written in chains. From the moment European colonizers mapped the continent, gold was not simply a resource. It was an obsession. Empires carved borders not by rivers or mountains, but by veins of ore. The Gold Coast, modern Ghana, was branded for what lay beneath its soil, not for the people who lived upon it. Mali's empires once dazzled the medieval world with caravans so rich in bullion that kings in Europe trembled with envy. But by the 19th century, those same lands were shackled into a colonial system that exported gold outward and imported poverty inward. Here's the paradox. Africa is home to some of the richest deposits of gold on Earth, more than 40% of global reserves by some counts, yet its people remain among the poorest. Why? Because for centuries the rules of trade were written somewhere else. In London boardrooms, in Paris ministries, in Zurich banks. Africa mined, but others minted. Africa dug, but others decided the price. It was like a banquet where Africans cooked the meal but never sat at the table. Fast forward to the 20th century. Independence swept across the continent, but economic chains proved harder to break than political ones. Ghana, the first sub-Saharan country to declare independence in 1957, remained tethered to foreign markets. Mali and Burkina Faso followed the same path. Gold was their ticket to modern development, or so leaders were told. But the international system had already set the terms. Western mining companies secured concessions at bargain prices, exporting bullion abroad while leaving behind a few jobs, polluted rivers, and fragile state revenues. The mines glittered for shareholders overseas, but in local towns, schools crumbled and hospitals lacked medicine. By the 1990s, something shifted. Structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF and World Bank demanded African states liberalize their mining sectors. The rhetoric was reform. The reality was surrender. National mining companies were privatized. Foreign operators flooded in. Regulations were loosened. On paper, these moves were supposed to boost growth. In practice, they widened the cracks through which billions could disappear. As governments shrank their oversight, shadow networks expanded theirs. The gold never stopped leaving, but the records became blurrier, the routes more secretive. Enter the artisanal miner. Across Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali, tens of thousands of men and women dug with bare hands, shovels, and makeshift equipment. Their labor was backbreaking, their earnings meager, but together they supplied nearly half of these nations' gold. Small-scale miners should have been the backbone of a proud national industry. Instead, they became prey. Foreign traders arrived with cash in hand, offering prices higher than local dealers but far below world market value. They blended into villages, learned local dialects, and set up hidden supply chains. The state collected nothing. The miners got crumbs. And the real profits, billions each year, vanished into the shadows. Take Ghana as an example. Officially, it exports about $6 billion worth of gold annually, but investigative reports reveal that nearly 2.3 billion more leaves unrecorded every single year. That's not smuggling by a few rogues. That's a system. The gold moves in hidden convoys, disguised shipments, private charters. In Burkina Faso, satellite images have spotted clandestine airstrips used for night flights. In Mali, trucks roll through remote border crossings where customs officials are either bribed or simply absent. Once across the frontier, the trail vanishes. The bars are melted, mixed, and laundered through legitimate refineries abroad. By the time they reach Dubai, Istanbul, or Geneva, the origins are invisible. The African state sees nothing. The global market sees clean gold. And here lies the deeper tragedy. The roots are not only criminal, they are structural. They exist because the official system was designed to fail the people who dig. Weak institutions, corrupt officials, and foreign demand converge to create a pipeline that operates in plain sight, yet remains untouchable. It's like a chessboard where Africa always plays pawns, while the other side moves queens and rooks without resistance. Every time a miner sells a gram at a roadside to a middleman with foreign currency in hand, another chapter of wealth extraction is written. Every time a government looks away, another vault overseas grows heavier, while the village that birthed the gold sinks deeper into dust. This is the origin of the secret gold roots. Not a sudden invention, but the long evolution of colonial extraction into modern smuggling, a system where silence is profitable, transparency is dangerous, and the world's hunger for gold ensures that the roots will never run empty. But if this is the background, what happens when a government decides to draw a line to declare that its soil is not an open buffet? Stay with me, because in the next section, we move from the shadows of history into the spotlight of action, where events in Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali ignite a confrontation no one saw coming. The year is not marked by fireworks or parades, but by a deadline whispered in trading houses from London to Dubai. April 30th, 2025. In Ghana, the government announced that every foreign trader, Chinese, Lebanese, Emirati, whoever had built fortunes buying directly from small-scale miners, must leave. Not next year, not after another round of negotiations. By the end of April, the Shadow Empire was to be dismantled. No more cash trucks pulling up to artisanal pits. No more envelopes stuffed with dollars changing hands in rural guest houses. From now on, Ghana's gold would flow through one channel only, a new state authority built to reclaim control. It was not an isolated move. The ripple began in Burkina Faso months earlier, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier turned head of state, had already shut down French military bases and foreign-dominated mining contracts. Alongside military sovereignty came economic defiance, a new state refinery, a central buying mechanism, and a blunt message: Burkina's gold belongs to Burkina. Mali followed with its own version, courting new deals with Russia and China, while severing ties with Western mining firms that once dictated terms. Suddenly, three countries long dismissed as unstable or dependent were moving in unison, rewriting the rules of one of the world's most profitable trades. The shock was immediate. In Accra, traders who had operated for decades began liquidating assets. Mansions in upscale neighborhoods went up for sale. Convoys of trucks quietly left mining towns carrying equipment toward ports before the rules snapped shut. In Ouagadougou, protests erupted outside embassies as foreign investors demanded clarity. In Bamako, diplomats scrambled to calculate how much uranium, cotton, and above all, gold would now slip from their grip. This wasn't just policy, it was rupture. Billions once guaranteed to overseas refineries were suddenly uncertain. The miners themselves felt the quake differently. In Tarkwa, Ghana's gold heartland, whispers spread in open-air markets. Would the state pay fairer prices? Would the bribes end? Or would the new authority simply become another middleman, dressed in national colors but practicing the same exploitation? In Burkina's north, where artisanal pits scarred the earth like open wounds, some miners welcomed the change as protection against predatory buyers. Others feared retaliation from networks that had grown used to impunity. After all, the roots were not run by amateurs. They were guarded by men with cash, guns, and connections stretching into parliaments and palaces. International reactions revealed the deeper stakes. In Geneva, gold refiners faced uncomfortable questions. How many tons of their bullion came from sources never declared? How many shipments labeled as legitimate had actually begun in African forests under the watch of militias and corrupt officials? In Dubai, where more than half of Africa's unrecorded gold is believed to pass, officials spoke of new partnerships while quietly lobbying African leaders to loosen their grip. Western governments, long happy to preach transparency while profiting from opacity, suddenly condemned what they called resource nationalism. Yet behind closed doors, they admitted the real fear: Africa was learning to say no. Consider the figures. In 2022 alone, Ghana officially exported around $6 billion in gold. But investigative reports estimated at least $2.3 billion more left the country unrecorded, smuggled along those secret routes. In Mali, the shadow trade was even greater, as much as 50% of national output. In Burkina Faso, plagued by insurgency, gold had become both a state revenue source and a militia lifeline. These numbers weren't minor leaks, they were floods. And now, governments were moving to dam the flow. For the first time in decades, the secret routes faced real resistance. Yet the confrontation was never going to be simple. Networks worth billions don't dissolve overnight. Traders who had lost their licenses simply shifted tactics, disguising themselves as partners of local firms, creating shell companies, or bribing officials to look the other way. Some began moving shipments through neighboring states with weaker controls, rerouting the river instead of stopping it. Intelligence reports warned that militias and criminal syndicates were stepping in, offering miners fast cash in exchange for loyalty, ensuring that the shadow trade would survive in new forms. The governments, bold as their declarations were, risked being outmaneuvered by the very networks they sought to crush. Still, the symbolism mattered. In a world where Africa had long been cast as the supplier of raw wealth for someone else's banquet, here were three nations standing up to say, "The feast begins at home." In Accra, President Mahama's words echoed, "We are not your pit. We are not your playground. This is our gold." In Ouagadougou, Traoré spoke of sovereignty not as theory, but as law. The wealth beneath our soil is not for the enrichment of strangers. And in Bamako, Mali's leaders declared their intent to build refineries, not just mines, ensuring that value remained closer to the source. These were not speeches lost in the wind. They were deadlines written in stone, policies backed by enforcement, and signals broadcast across the continent. The main event was not a single decree, but a chain reaction. African governments moving to slam shut the side doors through which billions had vanished each year. And the world was watching, some with admiration, others with fear. Because if gold could be reclaimed, what about oil, cobalt, lithium, or land itself? What if the continent that had supplied everyone else finally decided to keep its riches first? The secret routes were no longer silent. They were at the center of a showdown, one that promised to redraw not only Africa's economic map, but the world's balance of power. When you close the door on billion-dollar shadows, the echoes carry far. Ghana's April deadline, Burkina Faso's refinery decree, and Mali's defiance did not merely redraw contracts. They set loose a storm whose consequences ripple across economies, politics, and societies. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to peel back the layers, fact by fact, chapter by chapter. Gold is not just a commodity. For Ghana, it accounts for nearly half of export earnings. For Mali, gold is its largest revenue stream, contributing almost 80% of exports. Burkina Faso, though smaller, relies on it as a lifeline in the midst of conflict. When governments move to block raw or unrecorded flows, international markets shudder. Supply chains tighten, prices wobble, and refiners from Geneva to Dubai recalculate margins. For years, refineries in Switzerland and the United Arab Emirates enjoyed African gold at bargain prices, often without scrutiny. Smuggled bars mixed with legal consignments entered vaults as if they were spotless. Now the rules are shifting. Traders who once bought grams in dusty markets with cash are being forced into transparent systems. That means higher costs, more paperwork, and fewer loopholes. For Africa, it could mean billions reclaimed each year. For the global market, it spells volatility. It is like flipping a switch in a factory. The machines of profit do not stop, but they grind, shriek, and spark when a missing part throws the system off balance. Closing secret routes is not just economic, it is deeply political. Governments that challenge the gold underworld risk angering powerful allies and threatening entrenched interests. In Accra, foreign embassies murmured about investor confidence. In Ouagadougou, European diplomats whispered warnings of aid suspensions. In Bamako, rumors spread of lawsuits and sanctions. But here's the paradox. Boldness breeds legitimacy. When President Mahama of Ghana declared, "This is our gold," he was not just setting policy, he was signaling sovereignty. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's defiance reinforced his image as a leader unafraid to face the West. In Mali, the expulsion of foreign firms deepened alliances with Russia and China, carving new geopolitical pathways. It is as though a chessboard long frozen suddenly tilted. Pawns began moving like rooks, and queens in distant capitals scrambled to adjust. What does a closed smuggling route mean for the miner with mud on his boots? For the woman carrying sacks of ore on her back? For the child whose school lacks books while gold dust leaves by the kilogram? The hope is dignity. By funneling sales through state authorities, governments promise fairer prices, safer conditions, and investment in communities. In Ghana, revenue recovered from smuggling could fund clinics in Tarkwa. In Burkina Faso, taxes captured from legal exports could rebuild schools in the Sahel. In Mali, transparent flows might stabilize salaries for soldiers fighting insurgents. But hope collides with fear. Many miners distrust the state, scarred by decades of corruption. They worry new authorities will become monopolies, squeezing them just as hard as the old networks. And shadow traders cut off from supply are not fading quietly. Reports already hint at intimidation. Miners pressured to keep selling under the table. Militias offering protection in exchange for loyalty. It is like patching a leaking roof while a storm still rages. The rain slows, but every gust threatens to tear the new cover away. The world's luxury markets are built on African gold. The wedding ring in Paris, the watch in New York, the gilded skyscraper in Dubai, all may carry atoms of metal that began in a Ghanaian pit or a Burkina Faso trench. Yet consumers rarely ask. Governments rarely tell. Transparency was sacrificed to convenience. By forcing new rules, Africa is exposing a hidden hypocrisy. European regulators demand sustainability, yet their vaults accepted smuggled bullion. American investors preach ethics, yet profited from opaque supply chains. The moment African nations shine light on these flows, the contradiction becomes unbearable. If African gold is tainted, so are the profits abroad. It is like pulling a thread from a luxury suit. The fabric unravels, and suddenly the world sees what lay beneath the stitching. Gold is not just wealth. In conflict zones, it is ammunition. Armed groups in Burkina Faso's north and Mali's deserts finance themselves by taxing mines, escorting smugglers, or selling ore directly. Shut down those routes, and militias lose revenue. But push too hard, and the same groups may strike back. Governments face a dilemma. They must build transparent systems without driving desperate miners into the arms of insurgents. They must seize gold from militias without leaving civilians caught in the crossfire. The line between sovereignty and instability is razor thin. Success could starve insurgents. Failure could fuel new violence. It is a gamble where the stakes are not only bullion but blood. The actions of Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali are not isolated. They are signals. Guinea has already banned raw exports of key crops to secure food sovereignty. The Democratic Republic of Congo has tightened control over cobalt. Namibia has paused lithium exports, demanding local processing. Each decision adds momentum. If gold can be reclaimed, why not diamonds, oil, rare earths? Why not the entire foundation of Africa's role in the global economy? The secret roots of today could become the open industries of tomorrow. And if more nations join, the scale is staggering. Africa supplies over 30% of global mineral resources. Imagine if even half of that shifted from smuggling to sovereignty. It is less a ripple than a tidal wave. And the world's richest nations, long accustomed to cheap inputs, may find themselves scrambling for survival. Perhaps the greatest consequence is invisible. It is the change in self-perception. For generations, Africans were told their best role was to dig, sell raw, and stay quiet. Now leaders are saying otherwise. Now miners are seeing otherwise. A farmer who once sold gold dust for pennies now imagines his ore refined, branded, exported as made in Africa. Psychology is power. A nation that believes it owns its wealth begins to act differently on the world stage. Citizens begin to demand accountability. Youth begin to see a future at home instead of a ticket abroad. This shift cannot be measured only in dollars or kilos. It is measured in confidence. It is like a mirror finally cleaned. The reflection is no longer distorted. It is clear, proud, unafraid. Picture the contrast. In Ghana's mining towns, men waist deep in mud scoop ore with rusted pans, praying for specks of gold to pay for school fees. In Burkina Faso's north, women balance sacks of rock heavier than their children, trading strength for survival. Their reward, a few crumpled notes barely enough for food. And yet, on the same day, half a world away, a dealer in Dubai slides a polished bar across velvet, its surface gleaming under showroom lights, its value measured in millions. This is not trade. This is daylight robbery dressed in suits and certificates. The miners dig. The middlemen skim. The world applauds the gleam while ignoring the hands that bled to deliver it. It is Africa cooking the feast and watching someone else eat the banquet, night after night, year after year. But now the script is fracturing. When Ghana set an unmovable deadline, when Burkina Faso built its refinery, when Mali refused to bow, the shadow networks felt something they had never felt before: fear. The secret routes that once ran like invisible rivers are flickering under the spotlight. Customs agents whisper of bribes that no longer guarantee silence. Traders who once swaggered through villages now slip away, faces covered, phones switched off, and the backlash is fierce. Lobbyists in Western capitals cry foul, warning of instability. Refiners predict shortages. Diplomats issue veiled threats. But their outrage only proves the point. The theft was never invisible. It was tolerated. Now that the mask is torn away, the world is scrambling to justify its appetite. It is like a poker table flipped mid-game. Cards scatter, chips roll, and the players who once cheated with impunity are suddenly exposed. The question isn't who is winning, it's who dares to keep playing when the lights come on. For the miners, the climax is not policy but possibility. Imagine a boy in Mali who once dreamed of escaping to Europe. If gold profits finally built schools, would he stay? Imagine a woman in Ghana who lost a child to polluted river water. If revenues repaired her village well, would she believe sovereignty was more than a slogan? The drama lies here, the collision between centuries of extraction and the first sparks of defiance. On one side, vaults in Zurich, jewelers in Paris, skyscrapers in Dubai. On the other, a miner's calloused hands gripping a pan of earth. Both depend on gold, but only one side has begun to demand justice. And here's the haunting question: what if this defiance spreads? What if 10 nations slam the doors on smuggling routes at once? What if cobalt, oil, and diamonds follow gold's path? The world economy built on Africa's silence may find itself shaking, not tomorrow, not in theory, but now. The roots are drawn in dust, but their consequences are written in blood and loss. For decades, billions in African gold vanished into shadows, hidden flights, silent convoys, and ledgers that never balanced. Villages saw their rivers poisoned, their schools collapse, their futures pawned for someone else's profit. And yet, the world marveled at golden watches, wedding bands, and skyscrapers that glowed with stolen light. Now something different is stirring. Ghana's deadline was not just a date on a calendar. Burkina Faso's refinery was not just another building. Mali's defiance was not just a political statement. Together, they signal a new refusal, the end of pretending that Africa's wealth is an open buffet for the world's appetite. The question is no longer whether the secret routes exist. We know they do. The question is whether Africa can close them without paying another unbearable price. Will revenues return to villages? Will miners see fair wages? Will children drink from clean wells instead of poisoned streams? Or will new middlemen, this time cloaked in state authority, replace the old networks, repeating the cycle under a different name? The stakes extend far beyond Africa. Every bar of gold sold in Zurich, every necklace in Dubai, every circuit board in California may carry traces of this story. If the routes close, prices will rise, supply chains will tighten, and the world will be forced to admit a truth it has long ignored. Africa is not just a supplier. It is a sovereign force. So here's where the story rests, not with a neat ending, but with an open wound and an open door. Should Africa slam shut the secret routes once and for all? Should it demand that the world pay full price with fairness and dignity included in the bargain? Or will silence and complicity allow the shadows to endure? I leave that question with you. What do you think? Is this bravery? Is it madness? Or is it the long overdue justice Africa has always deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story. And subscribe, because the future of Africa's gold and the truth about the roots no one wanted exposed is only beginning to unfold.